evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas GK. Viewers, after intelligence czars from across the globe converged in Delhi with the likes of US Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, UK's National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell, and New Zealand's intelligence head Andrew Hampton in attendance, today, Raisina Dialogue, the three-day premier conference on geopolitics and geoeconomics, got underway. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his New Zealand counterpart, Christopher Luxon, jointly inaugurated the mega conference, with the theme this year being Kal Chakra, People, Peace and Planet. The New Zealand Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, as the chief guest, set the tone for the conference, highlighting the need for a free and open Indo-Pacific and asserting that countries must be free to choose their own path without interference. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar later emphasized on the need to think differently in today's world order to find creative solutions.
The world order is clearly undergoing a great churn. This requires leadership, the kind that we have in the room today. It requires systems to think differently, not simply falling back on old assumptions to deal with new situations. And it requires honest conversations, fresh ideas, and creative solutions. The value proposition that Raisina offers in that regard is higher than ever. So I know I speak for all of you in saying, let the dialogue begin.
Representatives of nearly 125 countries, including ministers, former and current heads of state, military commanders, industry captains and think tanks are participating in this dialogue. Over 3 days, a number of issues ranging from security, trade to strategic cooperation are likely to come up for discussion. The Times now spoke to a few dignitaries who are participating in this dialogue. Listen in.
2022, 3 years ago, we started the negotiations of the FTA with India. We've had over 14 rounds of negotiation, and we still haven't signed the FTA. I believe we now need to sign the FTA. It's going to be to the benefit of the UK and India, to our businesses, to our economies. It's going to turbocharge business, trade, and investment. So let's do it. And I implore Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, let's do the FTA and complete it now, because India is only the 12th largest trading partner of the UK. I mean, that's shocking. It should be one of the top 3 trading partners. Let's get on with it. Let's sign the FTA.
Well, I think the relationship, because we've signed a strategic partnership in Warsaw, we've signed an action plan, and now we're trying to implement this action plan. We are planning to host a military delegation from India to see us to talk about the defense cooperation, making something in cooperation with a big Indian corporation here, from Poland here, investment, and then selling it in the global south. Hoping that President of Poland will visit Delhi. Both were invited by Prime Minister Modi. So we are trying to make closer links.
Here's a meeting of Intel chiefs in Delhi yesterday assumes, in fact, significance as it's come in the backdrop of a Five Eyes intelligence alliance facing an unprecedented internal crisis, with a big shift in US policy under the Trump administration and the United States launching a trade war against Canada. There are speculations over the future of Premier Intelligence Alliance. In this midst of all of this uncertainty over the future of the Five Eyes, Delhi emerges as a new center for security and intelligence sharing talks. Interestingly, Prime Minister Modi met US intelligence chief Tulsi Gabbard on the sidelines of the Raisina Dialogue. Gabbard had earlier met Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, during which India has learnt to have urged the United States to act against the banned Khalistani terror group, Sikhs for Justice, which operates from American soil. India also called for action on its founder, Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, who faces 104 criminal cases in this country. The issue of Khalistani menace also came up in discussions that Prime Minister Modi had with his New Zealand counterpart.
Yes, certainly this was an issue that came up. We do alert our friends to the activities of anti-India elements in their countries and their abuse of freedom of speech and other democratic freedoms to glorify terrorism and to threaten attacks against our diplomats or our parliament or our events in India. So these were also conveyed.
And after Donald Trump shared Prime Minister's post, in fact, we had seen how the Prime Minister has now thanked his friend Trump. Earlier, the Prime Minister had hailed Trump's nation-first approach as well. And all of this while the Prime Minister, in fact, has posted on Truth Social as well. That's the latest coming in, of course, as far as... let's go across to Rishabh for more on this. Rishabh, very, very significant. First, it is Trump who, in fact, posted the podcast of the Prime Minister. And now we have seen the Prime Minister join Truth Social and also comment upon the range of issues that he covered in that podcast.
Well, Madhav, definitely. It is a rare phenomenon that a state head shares a podcast by another government head of a different country on his personal account. Donald Trump did that earlier today. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has joined Truth Social. Remember, Truth Social came into beginning when Twitter, not under Elon Musk, but before that, had banned Donald Trump from Twitter, accusing him of spreading fake news on social media. He started Truth Social, which means that it is very well connected with Donald Trump. Now, Prime Minister Modi has joined Truth Social, and this showcases that how both the leaders are very close.
Absolutely,
and how
not just the close personal equations that they have, but also on social media, this kind of commentary that is there. It's visible to everybody. It's out there in the public domain. Thanks so much for that quick update there, Rishabh.
Watching the News Hour at 10. Agenda. Debate number 1 on Times Now. Super Prime Time.
Joining us for more on this, we have Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of ORF. We also have Matthew Schmidt, Associate Professor of the National Security Department, Homeland Security at the University of New Haven. We have Patrick Kugel, who's a senior researcher at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Hussein Wagmar is from SOAS, South Asia Institute, University of London. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Sushant, let me start with you first. You're familiar with all of these developments, and we're discussing a whole set of them. At one level, you have, of course, the Prime Minister and President Trump engaging on social media. But what is very interesting is that all of these developments that are taking place, whether we're talking about, President Trump's own, positioning vis-a-vis EU, whether his own positioning vis-a-vis NATO, his own positioning vis-a-vis Canada, and all the chatter around Five Eyes, and all of that happening at a time where India is receiving several of these top bosses of several of the world's top intelligence agencies. How do you see this in terms of what India's role is and the role that India will play when it comes to security, when it comes to intelligence, between several of the countries of the West as well as the non-Western countries? Sushant.
Madhav, I don't think we should mix up too many issues. Look, at one level, I think what President Trump is trying to do is, in a sense, reorder the existing system, probably smoothen out some of the rough edges, which, according to him or his administration, they see having crept in the current architecture, security architecture which exists. At the same time, so there are going to be tensions between Western partners, which are quite visible. There's going to be some pulls and pressures, and they will respond to it as best as they can and in their own national interest. Now, where India fits in is that India has very good relations with the West. We have very good relations with the US. And frankly, we don't really have a dog in this fight. So what we will try and do is increase our own space. We will engage with our partners, both in Europe as well as in the United States, as well as in other geographies, and try and maximize our own national interest. One thing which I think everybody has now started to recognize is that India is a voice that cannot be ignored. Unlike the past, maybe 30, 40 years back, when India's voice did not carry the kind of weight it does today. Right. Today, both by virtue of the fact that you're the largest population, you are the 5th largest economy, etc., all of those things, you can't ignore India's voice. And frankly, I think that is the positioning that India is doing. So I think, you're trying to lump everything together, but maybe you need to disaggregate it a bit and then look at.
All right, perhaps we need to disaggregate it a bit over there. Sushant Sareen, Patrick Kugel is also with us. Patrick, how are you looking at this? Because, the whole point on the whole positioning, we don't know what's going to happen when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has its set of expectations, US has its set of expectations, and then you have Russia, which has its own set of expectations. The question that many are asking at this point of time is that how much of these differences that exist on ground are really going to impact, in the future? Because we're looking at a situation where the EU and the US seem to be on completely different pages, particularly when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yes, the tensions between US and Russia and the West and Russia, making this whole international system ungovernable. So it is the highest time to treat voices like India and the Global South, calls for the reform of the international system, very timely, and I think the West should treat it very seriously and start cooperating with willing partners to reform the international system. Because for the first time in history, we are in a situation in which the liberal international order formed by the United States is under attack, not from the outside, from any revisionist powers, but it is under attack from within, from its main founder and leader of this international global order. Tensions between the West and Russia paralyzed the United Nations Security Council. The Security Council is at the moment not suitable, not ready to solve any of the ongoing global conflicts. So we see most of the international institutions like WTO incapable to do their job. So probably we arrived at the moment when the time for reform is ripe, and time for reform is now.
Right. And in fact, let me bring in Matthew Schmidt on that. Matthew Schmidt, we've seen, of course, Prime Minister Modi talk about the role of UN, role of such organizations. Of course, the previous spokesperson also talked about that. But, we're looking at 3 or 4 developments parallelly happening from the USA side. One is the weakening of the NATO. We are looking at a rapprochement happening with Russia. And, of course, there appears to be a lot of statements coming in from USA which are directly challenging the European nation. The big question is, how are countries now going to cope with these changed realities that are going to evolve? We don't know what they will finally end up as Sushant was referring to. But how are we looking at, because, there are going to be several countries who are saying that, how much can we rely on the United States given these changes that are taking place before us?
I think we do have a good sense of where we're headed, and it's backwards to the 19th century. What we know is that after the development of nuclear weapons, we developed collective security arrangements like NATO, like a strong United Nations, like OSCE, like ASEAN, et cetera, because these weapons were so destructive that we had to control the proliferation of their technology and of their parts, and et cetera, right? And what's happening now is that structure is being destroyed. It, frankly, has been destroyed, because everybody has to consider, not will the United States pull back on its leadership, but it already has, and will it do it again? And so I think where we're headed is a 19th century world where the security logic is that everybody has to arm to the teeth. We're in a security dilemma where now not only do you have nuclear weapons, but biological weapons and artificial intelligence, which is a threat in and of itself, or an accelerator to develop biologics or nuclear weapons for other countries out there. And so you have this vastly weakened collective security architecture in a world now where you have expanded weapons of mass destruction from nation states and sub-state groups out there. And I think it's very, very dangerous. And we're just at the beginning about how bad that's going to be.
All right. Borzine Wagma, you share that view that we are perhaps at the start of a very dangerous set of examples, is what is being stated here by Matthew Schmidt. We're going to go back to the 19th century. And of course, the comments that J.D. Vance has made recently in reference of United Kingdom, what has been stated by even Elon Musk about the Prime Minister himself and his earlier profession, of course, as a prosecutor. All of this is certainly leading to a lot of questions about the disconnect between the US and the UK.
Very much so, and I would like to complement Matthew's perspective by affording some views on London. For one thing, it has occurred to all in the European theatre that Trump's capricity given how his on-again, off-again posturing is, that they would need to step up to the plate. One such aspect, Matthew, is this. It's still on the drawing board, but Anglo-German space cooperation is on the anvil, because we simply can't depend on Trump and the Americans, for example, and particularly Britain, on what is called sovereign capability to launch satellites and depend on US technology and launch facilities in light of the disruption to intelligence sharing with Kyiv, which occurred about a week ago. So that was something which jolted Britain and Whitehall, for one thing. And there has been talk since the Trinity talks, as they're known, since last October, even prior to Trump pulling the rug on Kyiv and supplying them with intel information of space cooperation. For one thing, Europeans are hemmed in with a very crowded airspace, not to mention the landmass, which is constricted. And of course, the basic facilities currently are in French Guyana, as you know, and of course, Kazakhstan at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which of course now brings in Russia as the great disruptor, because Russia was not willing to leave Baikonur Cosmodrome for quite a while, but was finally pushed out, if you will, and Kazakhstan could take control of its own space facility, given that Putin has also been, since 2022, fomenting trouble with white Russian nationalists in northern Kazakhstan, just like Kyiv and elsewhere. But there are two more points, Madhav, that I want to point out. Between 2019 and 2023, 4 shipyards in China have built 39 ships, and Chinese shipping stands at 53% of the global total. That will be discussed and will be of some consternation to all of the Five Eyes who convene in Delhi this week. That is something we noted, because the People's Liberation Army battlefield, as we speak, currently stands at 351 vessels to the US's 294, which is expected to reach 425. And one last point, North Korea's nuclear arsenal, currently of 50 nuclear warheads, is expected by 2035, thanks to Moscow's sponsorship, to stand at a good 502, while Europe is back.
Let me quickly bring in some of the other. You've covered a number of issues, but let me bring in Sushant. Sushant, here we have a situation where India has its own set of expectations that it wants to or would want to resolve at the very earliest. We all know what has happened, as far as Khalistanis are concerned in Canada and the United States. We have raised this issue, officially, diplomatically today with the United States and with New Zealand. And clearly, of course, is this something that we can expect the new regime will have a markedly different approach, at least when it comes to the United States, as far as previous regimes are concerned? Sushant.
Madhav, I think at least insofar as the Khalistani terrorism movement is concerned, I think it's a matter of some serious concern in India. And it's not just about India. It actually impacts upon these countries as well. Because look, in North America, for example, both Canada as well as the United States, many of these Khalistani gangsters are involved in crimes within those countries. Number one. Number two, they are involved in illegal, or all human trafficking is illegal, but they're involved in human trafficking networks. They're involved in narco-terrorism. They're involved in transnational crimes, including dope smuggling, not just in the subcontinent, but even in those countries. So a lot of the crib that the United States has against Canada, some of the guys who are bringing in drugs from Canada into the US are supposed to be Khalistani thugs. So this is a problem for them as well. Now, if they want to turn a blind eye for whatever reason, in Canada, of course, is a gone case, because the Canadians are hand in glove with, the Canadian political system is hand in glove with these thugs. But at least in the United States, that's not the case. So I think if India is pressing those buttons, there is a good reason for India to do this. Absolutely. And I think it's a mutual interest.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Matthew on that. Matthew, it's a problem that we've seen the entire diplomatic relations between India and Canada completely collapse. Perhaps that won't happen in the case of India and US, but there is a growing realization, as Sushant just stated, that several of these elements are actually working with a part of several of those underworld activities, which could be, against the interests of the United States. At least for that reason, do you expect that there would be a change of heart as far as Washington is concerned on this one very pressing issue that India has?
I don't know if there's a change of heart on the particular issue. I think there's definitely a change of interest in elevating India as a partner with the United States. I think it's very clear that having DNI Gabbard there is a signal that we want to elevate our relationship with India. I think it's a sort of playing with the idea of bringing India into a sort of Five Eyes agreement and positioning India as the chief partner in that region against China and with the United States. So it's something that the Biden administration was more reticent to do because of disagreements with the Modi administration, that the Trump administration won't share those reservations.
Gabbard, if I can also come across to you, do you think that this is something that is going to be acceptable to the UK regime as well? Because India has raised this now with the United States, with New Zealand, but there have been instances where, for instance, the Indian High Commission there has seen violent protests. There's been more than one occasion when that's happened, Mr. Burzin Wogmar. And the question that many are asking is, will we see similar sort of action, though India hasn't officially raised it with the UK yet, at the level which they've raised it perhaps today here in New Delhi? But do you think that's also something that the current regime in the United Kingdom would be willing to work on?
I doubt it very much, because the UK Labour Party is mired in identitarian politics. And of course, we have just issues not just with the Sikhs, but also with what is known as the Muslim vote bank. And UK Labour, for its part, has totted up the score and realized that Muslims constitute a natural coterie for voting at national and local elections. And any such policies which would be deemed detrimental to ethnic communities would be shied away from. And of course, the perspective that London and the Labour Party would put out is the question of community cohesion. That is the mantra that you also hear coming out of Ottawa under Trudeau's hyper-liberal regime that we just saw ended. And therefore, there was this perspective on their part to drag their feet and be reticent, and also to question India's claims of terrorism, because they perceived it as India's settling scores with its own expatriate community, when it is clearly not true. And Sushant has laid out for us what is really happening with Punjab, which is exporting not just terror, but arms racketeering, smuggling of all sorts. Not for nothing did those tranche of 100+ passengers, illegals who were deported back from San Antonio to Amritsar on that US Air Force flight, were Punjabis in the main, because it is Punjab that
I think you're mixing up two issues there. Very honestly, obviously nobody is going to be pro-immigration, but Sushant, you want to quickly respond to Burzin on that?
No, I largely agree with Burzin. The one point I want to make, look, if the British Labour Party or whichever government is there in Britain or in Canada, the decision they have to make is, do they want good relations with India or not? If they think that pandering to this criminal mafia, these transnational gangs, is what serves Canada and Britain's interest, then they can go ahead and do it. But that will have serious impact on their relationship with India, as is already starting to happen. If the Brits actually want a trade deal with India, you cannot have a trade deal if you're pandering to these kind of thugs in your country. You are giving them open license. You are allowing them to almost assault the Indian foreign minister. You cannot have this. And for the Brits to behave as though this is something which happened by accident, it was not deliberate, is utterly disingenuous, because everybody knows how chummy these cops were with these thugs. Absolutely. Right? So they let it happen. Maybe it was orchestrated. But whatever it was, it should never have been allowed to happen. So they have to make a judgment call. Do they want good relations with India? Is that worth their while? Or is pandering to these criminal mafias worth their while? That is the call they have to make.
That's a big question indeed. Sushant Sareen, Matthew Schmidt, Patrick Kugel, as well as Burzin Wogmar, thanks so much for joining us this evening and breaking this down for our viewers. Viewers, is the US green card no longer a guarantee for your stay in the United States? Reports have emerged from the US that green card holders, particularly elderly Indians, are being subjected to secondary inspections, overnight detention, and pressure to surrender their legal status at US airports. The scrutiny conducted by the US Customs and Border Protection officers is reportedly targeting individuals who spend extended periods outside the country. Reports say that US authorities are pressuring them to either face detention or surrender their legal status. In fact, Indians are not the only ones being targeted. A German national and green card holder was detained and allegedly, quote-unquote, violently interrogated by the US immigration authorities when he returned to the US on the 7th of March. So what are the legal options available to Indians who face similar treatment? Well, US attorneys are now saying that green card holders should not agree to give up their legal status as they can seek recourse from the courts.
You were watching the News Hour at 10. Agenda, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Let's take this across to our guest. Joining us, we have with us Bharat Barai, who's the chairman of the US-India Community Foundation. We also have with us Kripa Upadhyay, immigration attorney at the Bukhalter PC Seattle office. Thanks so much for joining us today. Bharat Barai, if I can come to you first. What would you have to say about the reasons for this increased scrutiny? Is it a change in government policy? And what really is your advice to those who are perhaps traveling? Because there are some who in fact come out and say that now is perhaps not the best time to travel, given the kind of strict norms and the possible denial of re-entry into the United States.
The law was always there that it's supposed to be permanent residents in USA and visit outside from time to time. But legally, as long as you came back within 365 days, it was okay. So there was liberal interpretation of the law. Now, after Trump has come and there is a scrutiny of the so-called illegal immigration, some of the legal migrants are also being harassed by some abusive or overusing Customs and Border Patrol agents, that they are trying to threaten some of the senior citizens or people who live outside USA for a few months. So this is a more rigid interpretation of the law that already exists.
What's your advice?
What is my advice? My advice
green
is
card holders, because it's being told that particularly senior citizens, those whose children may be, working in the United States, for instance, are the ones who are the most vulnerable to this kind of a situation. What would your advice to them be?
Well, what's happening is that during the winter months, I know I live in Chicago area, many of the parents, they do go to India, and when they try to come back, they do try to give them hard time. Many of them are not as well educated. They are not able to argue as well, and they are subject to threat by these people. The advice is very simple. A, try to minimize your stay outside USA, but I don't think 2 or 3 months will matter. B, do not give up your green card, because the Customs and Border Patrol agent can threaten you. They might sometimes detain you overnight, but they do not have the authority to take away your green card unless under the threat and fear you sign that form I-407 and surrender your green card.
Okay.
So the advice is keep your green card. It is the immigration judge that has to give you a hearing, and he is the only one who can take away the green card.
Okay, let me bring in Kripa as well. Kripa, in your experience as an immigration attorney, how many such cases have you come across recently? Has it gone up, and by what kind of percentage are we talking about? What really is happening on ground?
There is a massive increased enforcement, and that is true across all visa categories. We are hearing not only of Indian nationals that are being essentially put into what Customs and Border Protection calls secondary inspection, right? And so, again, these are individuals that may be older in age. I don't necessarily have an age breakdown, but the fact of the matter is these are individuals that are coming off of 12-hour, 16-hour journeys into the US that are being placed in secondary for about 7 to 8 hours at times. The bright line rule for immigration is there is something called continuous physical presence that lawful permanent residents are required to maintain in the US, right? And per the rule, lawful permanent residency, continuous physical presence is defined as no absence outside of the US for more than 180 days. Anytime you've been out of the US for more than 180 days consecutively, you are considered to be applying for readmission, right? And that's what CBP is essentially using. The disadvantage for senior citizens in particular is they don't have a job in the US. They probably don't have assets in the US. They probably don't have an ongoing bank account in the US. Those are all things that are discretionary to an immigration officer to review to show that this person did not intend to abandon residence, right? And when senior citizens don't have that, they've spent 16 hours on a plane, They've now spent, I don't know, 7 to 8 hours in detention at an immigration airport. They're essentially being told, if you want to leave, you can. Why don't you please just sign the statement? They're signing the statement without realizing that it is only a judge, an immigration judge, that has authorization to revoke your green card.
Right.
The other thing is that 6-month presence is what we in the law call a rebuttable presumption, right? Meaning they get to charge you with it, but the burden is on them to prove that you abandoned residence. It's just a whole lot easier for them to say, well, this person gave up their green card and that's that, right? So that's what's been happening. On the other side, we are also hearing reports now. There's now reports of a Canadian, I believe a German, I think a British citizen that have all been arrested and sent to immigration detention centers for alleged violations of their B2 tourist visas or their ESTA entry visas. So this is a whole new era of
Absolutely. It's a complete, that's of course a different era compared to the green card holders, because there are a fair number of Indians who actually have that document, and that's perhaps why this is of immense interest for us here in India as well. Bharat Barai, Kripa Udhate, thank you so much for joining our viewers and explaining it to them in terms of what to expect as far as these developments are concerned.